In the dim glow of a dying lantern, where shadows cling to wooden beams like spirits too tired to move on, welcome to folk fear. This is where forgotten rituals breathe, where curses linger in incense smoke, and where every whisper carries the weight of the dead. Tonight, we bring you a tale soaked in ash and silence, the kind that only monks dare speak of, and only in rooms where the fire never dies. You will hear the story of a man who fed the sacred flame not with wood, but with memory, with sorrow, with names best left unsaid. This is not just a legend, it is a warning. For in the heart of every temple lies a flame, and not all flames are holy. This is The Monk Who Fed the Fire, a cursed folk horror tale. The wind that wound its way up the mountain path was not loud, but it carried with it a hush that silenced the birds and bent the grasses low. Each step up the ancient stone stairway felt like a trespass. Leaves did not rustle. Insects did not hum. Only the faint echo of sandals pressing against stone accompanied the monk as he ascended, alone. His name was Nyam, young by the temple standards, yet old enough to carry the burden of quiet suffering in his eyes. He wore the ochre robes of a humble disciple, but his back was straight, his gaze steady. He had walked for 3 days in silence, as was tradition, eating nothing, speaking to no one, carrying only a satchel of folded incense papers and a small clay bowl filled with black ash. Not just any ash. The ember hidden beneath it still glowed, faint but pulsing like a heartbeat. The fire was never to go out. That was the first rule. At the crest of the mountain stood the temple, Sang Vihara. It rose from the stone like it had been carved by the mountain itself, dark, woodless, and bone-pale in the mist. Its sloped tiled roof drooped like a watchful brow, and the prayer flags strung along the eaves were too faded to tell their color. No bells, no gongs, only a single carved gate, its wood scorched black down the center, as if kissed by flame long ago. Nyam stood before it and bowed deeply. Then he stepped through. The interior of Sang Vihara smelled of smoke and sandalwood, not the fresh kind, but the old scent that clings to stone and skin, layered and heavy, like memories no one wants to name. His footsteps made no sound on the dark floor, worn smooth by centuries of kneeling. Monks moved silently through the corridors like shadows, heads bowed, eyes half-lidded, as though they were always listening to something behind the walls. Nyam was greeted not by a name, but by a gesture, a withered hand, extended, palm upward. An elder monk, face a web of deep lines, stood at the end of the hallway and waited. Nyam placed the ember bowl into the man's hands. The monk said nothing, but he bowed, low, reverent and trembling, as he turned with the bowl and disappeared behind a heavy curtain. That was how it began. Nyam had been chosen to be the next fire watcher. His cell was small, a mat, a wooden basin, and a window that faced the forest of stone lanterns outside, each one dark, their flames long extinguished. Some had names carved into them in a script so old even Nyam could not read them. Others bore no names at all, just symbols, scratched like wounds into their faces. He was told to wait, so he did. The next morning, before the sun had broken over the mist, a gray-robed monk led him through the temple's heart. He spoke not a word, but Nyam followed him past the prayer halls, past the pagoda where no one entered, and down into the earthen hollow beneath the main altar. There he saw it, the fire pit. Set in the center of a circular room with no windows, the pit was shallow but wide. At its heart, the flame flickered, small, steady, never wavering. No wood fed it, no smoke rose, it simply burned. Beside it, a black stone table. Upon it, a bowl of rice, a folded robe, a string of blackened prayer beads. These were offerings. He felt it immediately. The heat, yes, but also something deeper. The flame did not warm. It pressed. It weighed. It felt as if it looked at him, though it had no eyes. The elder monk who had taken the ember bowed before the flame, set the ember bowl beside it, and whispered something Nyam could not hear. Then he stood and turned to Nyam. His voice came dry like leaves crushed underfoot. "You are now the one who feeds it." Nyam bowed. He did not yet understand what that meant. The days passed in silence. Nyam learned the rhythms of the temple, prayers at dawn, sweeping ash from sacred floors, chanting sutras in unison, and tending the fire, always tending the fire. The ritual was precise. 3 drops of water, a pinch of ash from the elder jar, one offering, something of the flesh, something of memory, hair, blood, a sliver of bone, a bead once held in mourning. He did not question, not yet. At night he dreamed of fire with no warmth, of mouths that opened in the flame but never spoke. He awoke with soot under his nail fingers, though he had not touched the hearth. Once, as he passed the stone lantern grove, he thought he saw a flicker behind one of them, a soft blue glow like a spirit breath, but when he turned, it was gone. Another day, he heard a chant not found in their scrolls, sung in a tongue he didn't know. When he looked toward the sound, he found only the wind brushing the empty robes of a monk who had died decades ago, still hanging where they had left them. One evening, Nyam was left alone to tend the flame. A test, perhaps. The other monks had vanished into the prayer chambers, and the elder gave no instruction, only a look that said, "You know what to do." He did. He knelt beside the pit, set the bowl of rice on the stone table. But tonight there was no hair or bead or thread of cloth, only the ash and the ember still pulsing. He looked around. Silence. He reached into the sleeve of his robe, pulled loose one strand of his own hair, and let it fall into the fire. The flame hissed, not loud but sharp like breath through teeth. Then it flared, not upward, but inward, as if drawn toward some unseen throat beneath the stone. Nyam recoiled slightly, but the flame settled. It returned to its steady flicker. And yet, he thought he saw something in it. A shape, a face, eyes closed, mouth open, and for the first time he heard something in the fire. A voice, soft, almost childlike. "You fed it yourself." He did not sleep that night. Outside his cell, the stone lanterns did not flicker, but the one nearest his window, the one with no name, bore a faint warmth when he placed his hand upon it, like a breath had passed through it. He asked no one. He wrote no letters. He simply closed his eyes and dreamed again of a fire that burned downward, not upward, into the bones of the earth. And in the flame, something waited, watching, remembering, hungering. The fire burned low that morning, not weak, never weak, but quieter somehow, like it had eaten its fill. The embers curled inward, pulsing softly like the last breath of a dream. Nam knelt beside it, as he always did, bowl of ash and bone in hand. But the room felt colder than before. A hollow stillness clung to the walls. He sprinkled 3 drops of water onto the altar stone. They hissed and vanished. No steam, no scent, just gone, devoured. Something had shifted. After the ritual, Nam stood. His knees ached from the long kneeling, but he did not stretch. Movement in this temple was meant to be deliberate. Every gesture had weight. Even standing was a prayer. Today, he was alone again. No elder waited, no monk passed by the corridor. He turned toward the offering shelves behind the altar, rows of stone niches carved into the wall, each holding small clay urns, lacquered boxes, and cloth-wrapped bundles tied in crimson string. He had passed them each day, bowing as instructed, but now he paused. A single jar sat askew. Its seal was broken. Something inside had spilled. A fine dust trailed across the floor, leading like footprints into shadow. Nam approached it. The jar was cracked around the rim. Its lid lay sideways, the symbol of remembrance carved into it, worn smooth with age. He lifted the jar and tilted it. Inside were bones. Not large, not whole. Shards. Fingers, perhaps, or toes, blackened with soot. Among them, scraps of burnt paper, tiny curls of human hair, and a name etched on a strip of faded cloth. But the name had been half burned away. Liang? Nam whispered. Even that whisper felt like too much. The air shifted, not wind, but something deeper, as though the room had drawn breath. That night, Nam could not sleep. He lay in his cell, the stone cool beneath his back, staring at the ceiling beams overhead. The fire, even deep within the temple, seemed to pulse in his bones, not in warmth, but presence, as if it reached beyond its pit, beyond its sacred walls, and curled its smoke through every hallway, every breath. He arose. Stepping silently through the night corridor, he returned to the fire chamber. The flame was still there, still watching, still listening. It always was. Nam knelt again, though no ritual required it now. He stared into the flame and asked quietly, "Who are they, whose ashes we keep?" The fire answered with silence, but the shadows behind it moved. The next morning he approached the eldest monk, Master Vienne, whose face looked like carved from the same stone as the mountain itself. Nam bowed low and waited to be acknowledged. He did not speak until the old man's eyes opened. "Master, the offerings, some of them, they have names." Vienne's eyes held no surprise, only sorrow. "Names once spoken become bones. Names burned become smoke. We keep the ashes so they do not return." "Return?" Nam asked, quietly. The master did not answer. Instead, he rose with effort, walked to the corner of the prayer room, and pulled aside a hanging cloth. Behind it, another shelf. This one bore no urns, no offerings, only folded robes, dozens of them, stacked neatly, each scorched black at the hem. and in front of each robe a stone tablet, and on each tablet a name carved in shallow, precise lines. Names Nam did not recognize, but he counted 22. These were the fire watchers, those who tended the flame before you. Nam felt the chill reach his chest. All of them? Vian nodded. Only the flame endures. Later that day, as Nam prepared the evening offering, a shred of cloth from an anonymous mourner's robe, he noticed another jar beside the altar, one he had not seen before. Smaller than the rest, its surface smooth, polished black as though made from obsidian, it bore no symbol, no name. Curious, Nam lifted the lid. The ash inside was darker than the others, finer. It clung to the rim like oil. At the very bottom, barely visible in the dim light of the chamber, was a single fingernail. Human, charred, but not broken. Nam's breath caught. He reached to close the lid, but as he did, a wisp of ash curled upward, not drifting, but rising, purposeful. The flame flared, though he had not fed it yet. He stumbled back. The flame twisted, not high, not wild, but in a spiral, as if reaching to the ceiling. And in the heart of that spiral, for only a moment, a shape formed. A hand. Not a metaphor, not a trick of smoke. A hand. Pale, slender, held open, palm upward, waiting. Nam blinked. It was gone. Only the flickering flame remained. But he could still smell it. Not incense, not wood, flesh. That night a monk screamed. It was brief, a single cry, cut short. The temple was silent again before Nam could reach the hallway. He found nothing. No body, only a trail of black footprints across the stone floor, leading nowhere. No soot. Just footprints, as if someone had stepped out of the fire itself and walked away. The next morning there were no questions, no mourning, only prayer longer than usual, and silence heavier than ever. One of the elder monks, the one with the clouded eye, placed a new robe on the offering shelf. It was still warm. Nam said nothing. But when he returned to his duties, he found the strange black jar had moved. It now sat closer to the fire. No one claimed it, and the ash inside had lessened. In the days that followed, the air in the fire chamber grew different, denser. Nam felt watched even when alone. He began to hear faint sounds from the offering wall, a soft crackle like whispering embers. Once, as he passed the stone niche where the cracked jar lay, he heard a sound he could not explain. A breath, not his. A sound like someone exhaling behind him. He turned. Nothing. But the flame flickered sideways, like it was smiling. One evening, Nam dared to stay after the ritual. He waited beside the fire until the others had gone. Then he placed the fresh bowl of ash on the altar and whispered a single word. Liang. The name from the burned cloth. The flame dimmed, then with a soft whoosh, it surged upward, and in its light, Nam saw a face. Not clearly, not fully, but a woman, young, her skin blackened and cracked, her eyes hollow with grief. She opened her mouth as if to scream, but no sound came. Only the fire roared, then died back down. Nam was left alone, trembling, his lips dry, his hands shaking, and behind him, in the offering shelf, the jar that once held her bones was now empty. Only soot remained. But the name, Liang now glowed faintly on the stone, as if it had been fed, remembered. The next day, Nam added an extra chant to the ritual, not from the scrolls, but from memory, a prayer his grandmother used to whisper for the dead who had no graves. No one corrected him. But that night, he dreamed of ash falling like snow, and a voice, soft and broken, whispering just behind his ear. There are so many more. It began with a murmur, not from a monk, not from wind, not from memory, but from the flame. Nam first noticed it during the 4th moon of his watch, a sliver of time that hung over the temple like a veil. He had just completed the evening rites, and the flame was low, docile, as if sleeping. Yet as he knelt to whisper the final prayer, a chant of sealing, he heard something whisper back, not an echo, but in response. At first he thought it was the wind funneling through the cracked stone. The temple was ancient. It breathed through the bones of its walls. But this was no draft. This was language. Faint, fractured, and terribly human. Forgotten. Fire. My la. It stopped there, swallowed by the hiss of the flame, as if it realized it had spoken too much. The name clung to the edge of Nam's mind. Myla, a woman's name, sharp and soft at once. He had never heard it spoken in the temple, not during chants, not during offerings, not carved in the urns. But the flame had whispered it, and the flame never lied. That night, Nam returned to the urn wall. He lit a single taper and moved slowly, studying each name carved in stone, inked on cloth, sealed in prayer knots. There were so many, hundreds of offerings kept behind that quiet wall. Some bore only symbols. Others had been reduced to smears by time. But none said Myla. He checked the broken jars, the ones half-cracked and unsealed, the ones the other monks pretended not to see. Still nothing. And yet, as he passed a jar near the bottom row, a breath of warmth touched his fingertips. The candle trembled. The name on this jar had been burned off. Only black scarring remained. Nam held the taper close. There, etched faintly beneath the damage, nearly invisible, M-A-Y. He stopped breathing, and the flame in the jar pulsed once. He brought the jar to the fire, not to feed it, not yet, but to ask. The monks never questioned the flame, but Nam was no longer just a monk. He had begun to listen, and in doing so, he had become something else. He knelt with the scorched jar in his lap and stared into the fire. "Who was she?" he whispered. "Why do you speak her name?" For a moment, the chamber felt colder than stone, the kind of cold that didn't numb, but hollowed. The flame tilted slightly, as if peering. Then, without ceremony or spark, it replied, not in words, but in sound. A breath, drawn inward. And then, a whisper, not from the fire's core, but from behind it, as if something sat just beyond the veil of flame. She sang. That was all. A single phrase, barely more than a breath, but it pierced deeper than any chant. The next morning, Nam searched the forbidden scroll room. A sin, he knew. No monk below the level of ascended elder was allowed entry, but the flame had spoken. That was sanction enough. He slipped through the thin curtain of prayer beads that guarded the room. Inside, rows of ancient writings, some sealed in bone casings, others wrapped in smoke-darkened silk. He looked not for the freshest script, but the oldest, the scrolls written when the temple was still young, when the fire was still named. It was in the 5th row, beneath a layer of mold-warped incense papers, that he found it, a scroll with its title scalded into the skin of bark, The Song of Myla. His fingers trembled. The scroll was short, not a hymn, not a chant, a tale of a girl, a singer from the low valley whose voice was so pure it was said to soothe the dead. She was brought to the temple during a time of famine when the flames would not rise and the elders feared the spirits would awaken unappeased. They asked her to sing to the fire. She did, and the fire rose. But it did not stop. It took her voice, then her breath, then her bones. It consumed her even as she sang, not as punishment, but as payment. Her voice was too pure, too powerful. The fire had tasted reverence and demanded more. She became the offering. The scroll ended with a chilling line. The fire sang afterward, and her name has not faded from its song. Nam let the scroll fall shut. His skin crawled. The fire's whisper made sense now. It was not haunting him. It was remembering her. That evening, Nam burned no offering. Instead, he brought a stringed zither, cracked, barely tunable, and placed it before the flame, an old relic from a storeroom of forgotten tools. He knelt, and with hesitant fingers, he plucked the first note of a prayer melody. The fire leaned forward. Nam played. Each note echoed strangely in the chamber, as if caught in the stone, stretching longer than sound should. It was not a perfect song. It cracked, it faltered, but it was offered. And as the last note faded, the flame dimmed, not in weakness, but in reverence. Then it whispered again, "She waits." That night, Nam dreamed of firelight on water. A lake, moonless, still, with a figure standing at its center. A woman, charred robes, barefooted, her face half lit, half shadowed. She was not beautiful, but she was sorrow itself, made flesh, and she was singing. No sound came from her mouth, but Nam heard the melody anyway. It rang through his ribs like prayer bowls, soft and terrible. She turned to him and raised one finger, then pointed at the temple, then at the fire, and then at herself. He awoke in sweat. The zither was gone from the fire chamber, but a new offering sat in its place, a sliver of burned wood and a strand of long black hair, still warm. The whispers grew louder, not daily, not regularly, but when they came, they were no longer accidental. Myla waits, not fed, not freed. Remember. Nam began to answer aloud, to speak to the flame as if it were a companion, a grieving witness, a chorus of memory. The other monks noticed. Their eyes follow him now, no longer with reverence, but with fear. One left a folded paper outside his door one morning. No name, just a warning. Those who speak with her do not return from the fire. Nam burned the note, and the fire hissed in satisfaction. The following night, Nam prepared no chant, no incense. He simply brought the burned jar to the altar, opened it, and whispered, "Mila, if you wait, I will listen." The flame leapt. It burned white for a breath, and then, through its flickering edge, she appeared. Not a full vision, just eyes. Eyes filled with centuries of quiet, waiting grief, and a mouth that opened wide, not to scream, but to sing. A single note, pure, aching, rang through the chamber. The walls trembled, the floor cracked beneath his knees, and somewhere in the farthest end of the temple, a bell rang once, though no one had touched it in years. The next morning, the fire was quiet, still burning, but mournful, like it had sung all night and was now resting. Nam knelt beside it, placed both palms on the stone, and whispered, "I will find your name." The fire did not respond, but the air shimmered, warm, soft, like breath on skin, and the whisper came again, almost tender now. "Remember." The offerings had always been given in silence. A thread of cloth, a lock of hair, a sliver of bone wrapped in red string. Objects without voice, memory without consequence. Until they began to return. It started with a widow. She had walked barefoot up the mountain path, her steps slow, her gaze distant, as though she had followed something only she could see. Her hands held a small bundle wrapped in prayer cloth, a memento from her late husband, long decayed but cherished still. She was the first outsider to reach Sangvihara in over a season. The monks received her with the quiet they gave to the dying. She was not sick, but she carried a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. Even the wind seemed to bow before her presence. She offered her husband's hair, a curled tuft sealed in wax and oil, bound with a prayer knot aged to yellow. Nyam accepted it with both hands. He bowed, whispered a chant of transition, and walked it into the fire chamber himself. As he fed the hair into the flame, something peculiar happened. The fire did not flare. It withdrew, like it was unsure. Then, with a soft pop, it consumed the offering and shivered. Nyam stared. For a single heartbeat, the smoke twisted upward into a vague form, broad shoulders, bowed head, a man's outline in ash. And behind the flame, the widow gasped. She had followed him. She stood now at the doorway, trembling, one hand gripping the wood, her eyes wide and blank. Nyam rushed to her, but she did not speak, only stared. The air around her shimmered like rising heat, yet the chamber was cool. Then, without a word, she turned and left. The next morning, Nyam found her still sitting outside the gate, legs folded, eyes open, lips slightly parted, unmoving, dead, but not peaceful. Her body bore no wound, but her fingers were burned black at the tips, curled as if trying to hold on to something that had vanished. 2 days later, a child was brought to the temple. He came with his grandmother, who wept the entire journey. The boy had fallen into a deep, unshakable sleep. His breath was shallow, his skin cold. The old woman said he had spoken of seeing the fire in his dreams, a great flame that asked him to give something he loved. The child had given his rice doll. The monks examined him, but there was no illness. Nyam was instructed to accept the doll as an offering, a symbolic cleansing. He took it gently. It was old and handmade, stitched from straw and faded cloth. Its button eyes were uneven. A charm of protection was sewn into its chest, now torn. Nyam hesitated, but he burned it.
and the fire laughed. Not with sound, but with motion. The flame danced, erratic and sharp, like a tongue licking unseen wounds. It consumed the doll quickly, too quickly, and in the instant it died, the boy's eyes snapped open. But he did not blink. He screamed, not a cry of fear, but of pain, of recognition. It was her! She took it! The singing lady! She said it's not mine anymore! He sobbed until his throat gave out. When he slept again, he did not wake. That night, Nyam did not sleep either. The fire hissed constantly now, not just when offerings were fed, but all the time. A low, steady sound, like someone whispering a secret you could almost understand if you just got a little closer. He did, and it changed him. Each offering he fed now left behind a trace, a scent, a sound, a feeling. The prayer beads from a grieving father left the chamber echoing with soft sobs for hours. The faded silk scarf from a young widow made the stone beneath the altar warm to the touch, as if someone had just been sitting there. But it was the blood that changed everything. A farmer came with cut palms and a hollow stare. His crops had failed. His wife had left. He had nothing left but his body, so he offered his own blood. The monks hesitated,
But the elder said nothing, only turned away. Nyam accepted the offering, a cloth soaked in the man's blood, and burned it. The fire turned red, not orange, not gold, red, deep, ancient, hungry red. The chamber glowed as if lit from within the earth, and Nyam felt it again, that sensation he could never name. Something watching, something remembering, something pleased. That night he was visited, not in a dream, not in a vision, in his cell. The door had been closed, the lantern extinguished. But a flicker of firelight bloomed at the foot of his mat, not from a flame, but from a figure. A woman, ash-colored skin, hollow eyes. She held in her hands a string of burned prayer beads, the same ones from the grieving father. She did not speak, but she hummed. A melody without form, ancient, familiar, tearing. Then she was gone, but the beads remained, blackened and warm, on his floor. The fire had begun to return what it was fed, not whole, not alive, but pieces, echoes, grief. And the more it was fed, the more it gave. The monks began to whisper. Some fasted endlessly. Others muttered forgotten names in corners, clutching ash-stained robes. One began speaking backward in ritual, claiming the fire had shown him the truth, that time burned in reverse when seen from within the flame. He was gone by morning, his robe left behind, still warm. Nyam confronted the elder monk. "This is not cleansing," he said. "It's summoning." The elder stared into the flame, not blinking. "The fire remembers," he whispered. "It never promised to forget." "Why feed it then?" Nyam pressed. "Why continue?" The elder turned slowly. His eyes were glassy, old, full of ash. "Because if we stop, it may remember all at once." And then he walked into the darkness. Nyam never saw him again. By the 7th moon of Nyam's watch, the offerings had become ritualized grief, each one chosen not for its purity,
but for the depth of sorrow it carried. A mother's final lullaby, written on paper and sealed in tears. A bone carved with a name that had never been spoken aloud. A photograph singed at the edges, the child in the picture smiling, but headless. He burned them all, and with each, the fire grew more still. Not bigger, not louder, still, as if waiting, listening, collecting. One evening, as Nyam fed a broken hair comb into the flame, he heard a voice. Not a whisper, a voice. "You are feeding it wrongly." He turned. A monk stood at the doorway, one he had never seen before. Robes older than dust, eyes the color of wet stone. "You do not feed fire with sorrow. You feed it with silence," the monk said. Nyam blinked. "Who are you?" But the monk was gone. Only the scent of incense remained, old, stale, and faintly sweet, like something burned long ago. That night, the fire sang again, not in melody, but in memory. The chamber filled with the sound of a lullaby, not played, not sung, but remembered. And in the flame, Nyam saw a silhouette, Mela, her face clearer now, eyes closed, lips moving. But her hands, they were cupped, as if waiting to be given something. And in that moment, Nyam understood. The offerings did not appease, they bound. Each one another knot, another tether, another chain pulling the dead closer, until they were no longer behind the flame, but inside it, looking out. And some had begun to look back.
There had once been another, before Nyam, another firekeeper, one who no longer spoke, one who still breathed, but only just. The monks called him Thien, though none said his name aloud anymore, not in the chambers, not in the halls. His name carried weight, a hush that clung to it like incense to robes. He lived, if it could be called that, in the hermit's cloister beyond the temple's east wall, where the wind passed differently and even birds refused to land. Nyam had only seen him once, in passing, bent over a stone basin, scooping water with slow, trembling hands. The fire had taken something from him, and now Nyam needed to know what. The path to Thien's cloister was narrow, flanked by dead trees and lanterns that had never been lit. It smelled of old smoke and forgotten incense. A door, warped and half-burned, stood crooked at the entrance. The symbol of silence had been carved into its frame, 3 slashes drawn down like falling tears. Nyam bowed before entering. Inside, darkness. Not shadow, but an absence of light. A place where even memory seemed to dim. The room was bare, just a mat, a wooden bowl, and in the farthest corner, barely more than a shape, the old monk. He sat facing the wall, hunched, wrapped in gray robes that seemed stitched from ash. Nyam approached slowly. He did not speak at first, just knelt quietly, his hands folded. Time passed, minutes or hours he did not know. Then the monk moved. One hand lifted, slow, shaking, and pointed toward the corner of the room where the wall met the floor.
Nam turned. There, resting on a shelf carved directly into the stone, sat a small clay pot, blackened, sealed with wax, and beside it, a charred scroll. No words on the scroll, only markings, circular, coiling in on themselves like flame trapped in ritual. The monk did not speak, but his hand lowered and rested on his chest. Nyam understood. Back at the altar, Nyam unwrapped the scroll. It was not a chant. It was not even a prayer. It was a binding. A ritual long abandoned by the outer temples, one that once served to contain spirits too strong, too bound to grief, too unwilling to leave. The scroll described it as feeding the fire backwards, offering not memory, but silence, not names, but forgetting. To unbind a name, you must never speak it. You must burn the memory, not the object. But no one had ever tried it, because to forget was to die twice. Nyam returned to Thien 2 nights later. He brought with him a sliver of his own journal, a page upon which he had written Mela's name dozens of times. He burned it before Thien's cloister and waited. Inside, the old monk stirred. Then, for the first time in years, he turned. His face was not whole. The left side bore the marks of fire, not scars, but burns that never healed. His lips did not part, but his eyes, they wept. Nyam asked, "Did you speak her name?" A tremor passed through the monk. He nodded, once. "Did you see her?" A second nod, slower. "Did she ask for more?" Silence. Then, to Nyam's horror, the old monk lifted his sleeve and revealed a hand no longer human. It was ash, dry, crumbling at the fingertips, as if every offering he had once given had returned through him. He placed that hand upon his chest again, and Nyam understood the final message: you become the altar. That night, the fire refused his offering. It crackled, it shimmered, but it did not take the bone fragment Nyam placed on the stone. Instead, it flicked sideways, as if pointing to the far wall, to the empty jar where Mela's name had once been scorched away. The jar was missing. He searched the shelves, the old storage rooms, even the sealed reliquaries behind the prayer hall, but it was gone, as if it had never existed. But Nyam remembered. He remembered the warmth, the strand of hair, the name whispered through smoke, the hum behind the flame. And as he stepped back into the chamber, the fire burned blue. It had only done that once before, when the blood was offered. The monks gathered in silence that dawn, not for ritual, but for loss. One of them had vanished, a boy monk, barely of age, last seen sweeping the entrance steps beneath the prayer flags. All that remained was his broom, snapped clean in half, and near it, a string of blackened beads, still warm. Nyam confronted the elders. "This is not the will of flame. This is hunger." The head monk, face pale and voice barely audible, replied, "We have no will, only remembrance. Then we must forget." That drew silence. true silence, as if the stones themselves held their breath. No one responded, but no one stopped him either. He returned to Thien's cloister once more, this time with purpose. He brought the burnt scroll, the bone bowl, the jar of silent ash. He built a second altar, not of stone, but of silence. No chants, no incense, just a single candle and a sealed box, one he would never open. Inside, the last page of his journal, the one that bore her name. He did not feed the fire that night. Instead, he sat across from it, candle between them, and waited. And as the hours passed, the fire began to falter. Not extinguish, but dim, like it was remembering something it didn't want to, like it was feeling the pull of unspoken grief. Then, at midnight, the fire surged once more, tall, gold, beautiful. And in it, Nyam saw her again. Not broken, not burned, whole. She stood in the center of the fire, eyes closed, mouth open, no longer humming, but silent. And that silence hurt more than song. She raised her hand, not in warning, in farewell. Then the fire folded in on itself and was still. At dawn, the monks found Nyam kneeling before the cold fire pit. The candle had burned out, the chamber was silent, and beside him sat the black jar, whole again, but sealed in wax. Its surface shimmered faintly, no longer scorched, and at its base, scratched by hand, Mela, remembered. Thien passed in the night. He was found seated, hands folded, a smile on his broken lips. No ash on his skin, only warmth, as if someone had sung to him in his final breath. The fire returned the next evening, quiet, humble, and when Nyam knelt before it, he did not bring offerings, only silence, and the fire bowed in return.
The fire was quiet now. It burned as it always had, steady, low, without crackle or smoke. But something had shifted. The hunger had paused. The room felt less suffocating. And yet Nam could not rest, because the silence left room for something older than flame, something that had no voice, but now had a face. It began with a flicker, a strange bending of light along the fire's edge. One evening, as Nam knelt for the rite of offering, though he brought nothing, he noticed the smoke lingered longer than it should, not rising as usual, but drifting low, curling into shapes that refused to vanish. Not random, not chaos, deliberate. A curl, a slope, a narrowing at the top. Then 2 hollows where eyes might be, and a mouth, not screaming, but open. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, whispered a chant of dismissal. The shape remained, then slowly faded, not into air, but backward, folding into the fire as if it had been watching from within. The next morning, he asked one of the senior monks about smoke figures. The monk said nothing, but his hands, once steady, trembled as he poured tea. Then he said one sentence. "When smoke does not rise, it kneels," and left the room. By the 7th night, the shapes became clearer, not just faces,
but expressions. Grief twisted into mouths, eyes bulging with ancient sorrow. One face had no nose, another had two mouths, one above the other. One was a child, not burned, but bruised, lips quivering in a frozen scream. They didn't move. They simply stared, waiting. Nam tried to avoid the fire. He skipped the evening ritual once. The flame dimmed, then surged. A scroll nearby burst into spontaneous ember. The scent of charred silk filled the corridor. When he returned to the altar, the smoke formed instantly, a dozen faces, overlapping, turning in unison toward him. They did not fade this time. They lingered and breathed. That breath was not audible, not loud, but filmed the room like pressure. He felt it on his skin, soft, almost warm, like hands brushing along his arms. One face leaned forward. Smoke rolled out of its open mouth, and within it, Nam heard a name, Tuet. He did not know her. He wished he did, because the face that whispered her name vanished like it had been erased, and the fire pulsed as if it had swallowed something alive. He asked the records keeper if there was a Tuet in the temple's memory. The keeper, an old woman with no voice left, simply led him to a scroll sealed in ash. The wax had cracked. Inside, a list of names, each one a woman, each one burned during the drought sacrifice over a century ago. The scroll had been sealed with a vow to never be read aloud. But it had been opened, and one name was circled in red ink, though the ink was so old it had begun to flake. Tuet. That night the smoke returned, but this time the faces hovered closer. They drifted toward the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. Some whispered names, others just stared. But one lingered longer than the rest. A woman's face, half burned, mouth curled in a sorrowful smile. She said nothing, but her eyes locked onto Nam's and did not release. He knelt for hours, frozen, breath shallow. When she finally dissolved, the fire dimmed to a glow no brighter than a dying candle, and in the ash, at the base of the pit, lay a tooth, white, human, perfect. The monks did not speak of it, but when Nam showed them the tooth, they each stepped back. The oldest among them crossed his arms in a sign of warding and muttered, "The fire returns what we bury." Then he took a candle, lit it from the main flame, and dripped wax over the tooth until it vanished beneath the hardened drops. He placed it in a jar, sealed it, buried it beneath the altar. But that night, the jar surfaced again, on Nam's pillow, still sealed, still warm. The faces no longer waited for ritual. They came in the silence, when he walked the halls, when he washed the stones, when he closed his eyes for too long. Even in the smoke, even when there was no fire. A lantern would flicker, a curl of incense would twist the wrong way, and there they'd be, watching. He tried to pray them away. The chants no longer held shape. The words turned to ash in his mouth. Even the bells, when struck, sounded muffled, like they were ringing underwater. The temple itself had become quieter, too quiet. Even the birds outside the gate no longer sang. One morning, a junior monk was found sitting at the edge of the fire pit, unmoving, his face serene, but his eyes were gone, not gouged, gone, as if smoked away. And in the soot beneath him, 2 eye-shaped smudges remained, perfect, hollow, watching upward. That evening Nam made a choice. He entered the fire chamber with no offering, no chant, no robe, only silence, and a mirror. A small cracked mirror taken from the temple reliquary. He placed it in front of the fire and sat opposite it. Let the flame reflect itself. Let the faces look upon themselves. At first, nothing. Then the smoke rose, but it did not spiral or drift. It bent. It leaned toward the mirror. One by one, the faces emerged. Dozens, hundreds, some screaming, some open-mouthed in grief, some whispering names Nam could not pronounce. But when they saw their reflections, they stopped, as if surprised. Ash curled inward, mouths closed, eyes blinked, and for a brief, terrible moment, Nam saw himself among them. Not his living face, his death mask, eyes wide, mouth silent, burned. The mirror cracked down the middle. The fire pulsed once like a heart, then went still. And the faces vanished, but the smell remained. Not smoke, not ash, memory. The scent of sorrow, familiar, lingering. And in the center of the pit, where no one had ever dared carve, someone had scratched a line in the soot. One word, not Twet, not Mela, not Nam, just more. That night, the mirror was gone. Nam searched. No monk had moved it. But on the altar where it once sat, a reflection shimmered in thin air. His own face, smiling, and behind it, a crowd of faces, of smoke, of memory, waiting.
There was a scroll that no one touched. It sat behind the altar, sealed in twine blackened by time, hidden beneath offerings that had long since crumbled to ash. Nam had passed it many times without notice, thinking it another relic left to gather dust. But tonight, after the mirror vanished, after the faces grew bold, the scroll called to him, not with sound, but with heat, a soft pulse of warmth that radiated through the stone shelf, not comforting, but insistent. He waited until the midnight bell, when the temple was at its stillest. Then, candle in hand, he returned to the fire chamber and unwrapped the scroll. The twine crumbled between his fingers like dried roots. The wax seal bore no sigil, only a burned thumbprint, as if marked by someone in their final breath. He unrolled it slowly. The parchment crackled. What he found inside was not scripture, it was confession. The scroll was old, older than the altar, older than the monks who now served. The ink had bled in places, but the story it told remained, jagged, fragmented, but unmistakable. A drought, a famine, a village on the edge of death, and a fire that refused to light. The temple priests, desperate to save the crops, turned to ritual. Not prayer, not devotion, but offering. They burned rice, it did nothing. They burned incense, it wilted. They burned livestock, the sky stayed silent. Then they turned to something else. Someone else. A girl. The name had been scorched out of the scroll, but the lines that followed were clear. She sang as the flames took her. She did not scream.
And so the fire listened. The rains returned the next morning. The harvest came back twice as strong the next year. So they burned another and another. The fire that Nam now tended had been born not from sacred devotion, but from blood. Not metaphor, not legend. Real bodies, real names, real sin. Nam read the scroll 3 times before rolling it shut. He stared into the flame, now smaller than ever, as if ashamed, and for the first time he whispered not a chant, but a question. How many? The fire did not flare, but from the ash pit came a sound, a soft shifting, and when Nam leaned forward, he saw them. Not faces, bones, tiny fragments, teeth, fingers, the curve of a jaw half buried. He had knelt upon a grave all this time. He dug, hands bare, no tools. For hours he worked, fingers bleeding against the stone. By dawn, he had uncovered them all. 24 skull fragments, charred vertebrae, a burned femur with a child's bracelet still melted around it. And beneath it all, a tile, carved in a language older than their chants. He brought it to the records keeper. She touched it once and wept. The elders convened, not in the great hall, but in secret, behind the veil of incense where the walls listened. Nam was not invited, but he heard them anyway. Arguing, whispering, blaming. Some wanted to reseal the chamber, others to let the fire die. But one voice, the voice of the oldest among them, said, "The fire must burn, or it will remember all at once." And silence followed. The next day, Nam found a new scroll on his mat, fresh ink, unsealed, just 4 lines. The fire was never sacred. It was shame made holy. Do not seek to cleanse it. It feeds on what we hide. He returned to the altar with no offering. He knelt. He placed the bone fragments on the stone, not to burn, to return. Then he spoke each name he had found in the scroll, even the ones that had been scratched out. He guessed. He gave them voice. The fire did not respond until the final name. The name without letters, the one carved into the ancient tile in the ash pit. He did not say it. He simply placed the tile in the flame, and the fire stopped. For the first time in centuries, it went dark. No ember, no smoke, only silence. But not peace. The silence was waiting. The temple fell into disarray. Without the fire, the rhythm collapsed. No prayers were spoken aloud, no offerings made. Monks wandered the halls in confusion, some weeping, some silent, some vanishing entirely. One walked into the woods and never came back. Another sat beneath the great bell and screamed until his voice gave out. And the elders? They sealed their quarters, said nothing, did nothing, as if paralyzed. Only Nam remained at the altar. He lit candles, not for worship, but for memory. He arranged the bones with care. He swept the ash with his own sleeve, and he listened, because the silence had begun to whisper again. Not like before, not names, confessions. He heard them in the cracks of the stone, in the sigh of a windless corridor, in the breath between blinks. We chose her. We lied to the people. The rain was a coincidence. but we kept burning anyway. One voice, older than the rest, came last. And now we served a fire that feeds on us. That night, the fire returned, not with smoke, but with tears. Thin trails of water seeped from the stone surrounding the pit. Real water, cold, pure. It pooled at the base, and within its reflection, Mila, not burning, not singing, kneeling, palms open, eyes closed, forgiving. Nam bowed to her, whispered only 2 words, "I remember." The water rippled. The fire relit itself, not red, not gold, white, soft, like the final breath of someone who no longer feared death. The next morning, the elders opened their doors. They found the fire burning clean, the bones gone, the chamber quiet, and Nam sitting in stillness. He did not speak, but he smiled. And behind him, in the ash on the stone, a word had been drawn with a finger. Buried. The fire had stopped hungering, but it had not forgotten, because the sins in the cinders had finally been named, and names, once spoken, become sacred again.
There was a bell in the southern courtyard of Song Vihara. It had not rung in over a century. Its bronze frame stood half swallowed by moss, vines draped like veils over its curved lip. The wooden beam used to strike it had rotted long ago, now nothing more than splinters beneath it. Birds never nested near it, wind never passed through it. The monks called it the unstruck one, not because no one had ever rung it, but because no one could. Yen had passed the bell countless times in his rituals, never thinking much of it. It had become part of the silence, part of the background of the temple's heavy air. But since the fire had turned white, since Mela appeared kneeling in water instead of flame, the bell began to weigh on him, as if it too had been watching all along, as if it too remembered. He visited it after dusk, not for ritual, for truth. He approached the bell barefoot, robe brushing the damp stone. The moon hung behind clouds, offering no comfort. Only the distant rustle of bamboo in the wind reminded him that the world beyond the temple still existed. He placed one hand against the bell's surface. Cold, hard, dead. And then, warm, just for a breath, just enough to make him flinch. The bell bore no markings, no prayers, no name. But on the underside of the rim, hidden beneath years of grime, was a single carved line. For those who burned unheard. A dedication or a curse. The next day, Yen asked the records keeper about the bell. She hesitated, then brought him a scroll not wrapped in silk, but in soot-stained linen. She unrolled it without a word. It told of a ritual once known as the last ringing, a ceremony meant to guide the souls of the unjustly silenced across the veil. The bell, according to the text, was to be rung once for every spirit whose voice had been consumed by flame. But the ritual had never been completed because the bell never sounded. The fire had taken those voices, and the bell had swallowed their echoes. Yen asked if anyone had tried since. The keeper did not answer, but her hands folded into her sleeves and her eyes closed as if she had once tried herself and failed.
That night, the fire burned low again. Yen stood before it and whispered, "They want to be heard." The flame bowed, then turned blue just for a moment, and the walls of the chamber trembled. A sound like a hum rose from beneath the floor, low, distant, metallic. Not the bell, but the memory of it, as if the temple itself remembered its voice. The next morning, Yen prepared a ritual, not from the scrolls, from instinct. He gathered ash from the altar, not the fire's ash, but the remains of old offerings stored in the reliquary jars. Hair, teeth, scraps of silk burned at the edges, even old names scratched onto bone. He crushed them into dust and formed a circle around the bell. Then he knelt. He did not strike the bell. He spoke to it. "You were meant to ring for them. You were meant to carry their voices into the wind. Do not let silence be your offering." Then he waited. Nothing. The bell did not move. No hum, no resonance, only quiet. The kind that settles after disappointment. He returned to the fire. This time he brought no ash. He brought a bell. Small, handheld, the kind used in novice ceremonies, light, cracked, barely functional. He placed it at the center of the pit and fed it to the flame. The fire devoured it instantly, but the sound it left behind echoed for several breaths, a soft, high chime that rang in Yen's ears even after it vanished. He went back to the great bell, knelt again, whispered again. This time, the bell was warm before he touched it, and when his fingers brushed its base, it vibrated. Not much, but enough, like a breath held too long. That night, Yen dreamed of 1,000 mouths opening at once, not screaming, speaking, chanting a prayer without words, and in the center of them all, the bell, not struck, but glowing, ringing without sound, a resonance felt in bone, not heard. He awoke with blood at his ears, a faint echo still inside his chest. And when he stepped outside, the other monks were already gathered at the southern courtyard, staring. The bell had moved. By inches, but it had moved, as if nudged from within. Yen spent the next 7 nights kneeling before it. No chants, no gongs, no fire, just silence and remembrance. Each night he whispered the names of the forgotten, the ones from the scrolls, the ones from the ash, the ones the smoke faces mouthed in their silent screams. He said them aloud, all of them. And on the 7th night, when he spoke Mela's name, the bell sang, just once, clear, high, pure. It rang without being touched. The sound rolled through the temple like morning sun, chasing shadows, awakening memories, stirring breath in those who had forgotten how to breathe. Some monks wept, others fell to their knees. Even the oldest among them covered their faces because they had not heard that sound in 100 years, and it was beautiful, and it was terrible. The fire flared that night, but not in hunger, in joy. It shimmered gold and white and pale blue, as if echoing the bell's voice. No faces emerged, no whispers rose, only warmth and peace. In the days that followed, the bell rang only once more, for a child whose name had been lost. The flame turned soft lavender. The temple fell into deep silence. Not fear, stillness, sacred and earned. Yen no longer needed to feed the fire with offerings. He fed it with names, with memory, with truth. And the bell, it listened. And far below the temple, beneath the ash pit, in the deepest hollow of stone, the smoke curled in silence. Faces closed their mouths, eyes shut gently, and for the first time since the fire was lit, they slept.
Nyam began to hear the melody in silence. Not a tune played aloud, not from lips, but from stillness, in the pause between footsteps, in the hush between bell tolls, in the soft flutter of candle flames. A melody with no beginning, no end, just breath suspended. It came with the fog some mornings, curling like incense between temple stones. It came in his dreams, in the moments just before waking, when he wasn't sure if he still belonged to the living. Always the same voice, always the same aching gentleness. Mila. The flame had changed. It no longer demanded. It no longer flared at offerings. It accepted memory. When Yam lit candles now, they did not hiss. They glowed. When he whispered a name, the fire bowed, a flicker of gold acknowledging the presence of the remembered. And yet, each night, the fire pulled him deeper, into itself, into her. It began with a dream. Nyam stood within the fire chamber, but the walls were gone, the roof gone. The stars overhead bled red across a black sky, and before him, the flame rose like a living column, and within it, Mila. No longer a face in smoke. She was whole, hair singed but flowing, eyes dark but open, lips moving, but there was no sound, only motion, a prayer. He watched her speak the same phrase again and again, her hands pressed together, her mouth forming syllables he could not hear. When he awoke, he tried to recreate them, mouth shaping air in front of the altar, unsure of what they meant, until the fire shivered, not flared, shivered. And in the center of the pit lay a scroll. It hadn't been there before. The scroll was not written by a monk. It was not bound in silk. It was stitched with hair. Its script was not ink. It was ash, so fine it shimmered under candlelight like black snow. And it was written in a language Nam had seen only once before, on the sealed bone tiles buried in the pit. The language of the sacrificed. He brought it to the records keeper. She refused to touch it, only said, "That is not meant to be read. It is meant to be sung." He brought it back to the fire, unrolled it, knelt, and began to hum. Not from knowledge, but from instinct, from memory that was not his. A low tone, a descending note, a pause, a rise, a fall. His voice cracked, not from strain, but from grief. And as he sang, the fire bent, softly, reverently, as if listening to someone it had once devoured. The room changed. The stones glowed faintly. The air thickened, not oppressive, but sacred. And she appeared, not in the fire, beside it. Mila, whole, real, not smoke, not memory, but presence. She was kneeling, eyes closed, lips moving with his. She was finishing the prayer. He could not stop singing, not until her lips ceased to move. And when it ended, silence fell, not emptiness, sanctity. She opened her eyes,
and spoke. Only one word. Free. Then she turned, walked into the fire, and the flame did not consume her. It cradled her. It folded around her like silk, and she was gone. That night, Nyam did not sleep. He sat before the fire until dawn, eyes open, hands folded, waiting. But Mila did not return, not in dreams, not in smoke, not in ash. She had moved on, and for the first time since the fire had been lit, a spirit had been released not by forgetting, but by finishing what had never been allowed to end. A prayer, a song, a name returned. Word spread through the temple. The fire had changed. Its color held a soft hue now, pearl white with edges of gold. It no longer cracked. It no longer hissed. It whispered in warmth. And when monks knelt before it, they wept. Not in fear, in cleansing. Nyam transcribed the melody. He could not write it in words, only breath marks. Rise, pause, hum, fall. He taught it to no one, but he sang it each night. One offering, one name, one song. And with each, the fire glowed brighter, not louder, brighter, as if reclaiming the light it had taken. One morning, a jar vanished from the reliquary shelf. No one had touched it. It had belonged to a girl named Ling, burned for speaking in tongues no one understood. That evening, her voice was heard in the wind chimes, the same tone as the fire's new hum. The monks bowed toward the flame and sang her free. One by one, the forgotten left. Yam no longer saw smoke faces. He saw petals drifting through air that had never before known softness. He heard laughter in the silence, and in the echoes of the bell, he felt presence instead of weight. But the fire still burned, because not all prayers had been finished. Some spirits remained, not violent, not lost, just waiting for someone to sing the final note, to speak the name no one dared say, to forgive what had once been unforgivable. And so each night Nyam returned and sang. One evening, as he lit the chamber's candles, a folded piece of cloth awaited him on the stone. Old, charred. It bore a name stitched in white thread, not one he recognized, but one the fire did. It bowed. And so he began again. Another melody, another whisper, another soul, gently unbound. This was no longer a ritual of binding. It had become a lullaby for the forgotten.
The fire no longer devoured what it was given. It accepted. It listened. It remembered. But as it grew calmer, as the spirits were released and the nights became quiet again, something within its heart began to stir. Not hunger, not grief, but will. The flame had begun to choose. Nam noticed it first with the offerings. Once, any object, any trace of memory or grief would spark the fire's reaction. A scrap of cloth, a chipped rosary, a sealed letter from the dead. They all burned. They all echoed. But now, the fire grew particular. One evening, a monk offered a bracelet worn by his sister before her death. The flame curled away from it, rejected it. The air around the object remained cold, untouched. The bracelet remained unburned. The monk wept in silence. "She has already left," Nam whispered.
The fire said nothing, but it nodded, a ripple in the flame like a quiet exhale. Another monk placed a folded chant scroll before the fire, one written by his master before he passed in seclusion. The fire accepted it, but instead of flaring, it dimmed, and in the silence that followed, a voice, soft, deep, spoke a single word through the smoke. Incomplete. The fire was no longer a flame of judgment. It had become an oracle, alive, selective, awake. It began to glow in colors no one had ever seen in fire. At dusk, it turned violet, soft and cool like twilight whispering across stone. At midnight, it shimmered blue, not cold, but reflective, like deep water. At dawn, it returned to white, pale, steady, sacred. And in each hue, it revealed something different. Not visions, choices. Monks began to approach it not just for ritual, but for guidance. They brought questions, not aloud, but within. One by one, they sat in silence before the altar. And when they left, they carried peace, or penance, depending on what the flame had shown them. But peace is not permanent, and light, even sacred light, casts shadows. One morning, a monk returned from the altar in silence. He did not speak again. He ate little, slept less. He sat beside the sealed urns and whispered to them. And then, one evening, he walked into the fire chamber, bowed deeply, and stepped in. The flame did not flare. It did not scream. It accepted him, folded him into its center like cloth laid across still water. When Nam arrived, there was no ash, only a faint golden imprint on the stone, and the single word burned into the wall above the pit: willing. It had happened before. Nam knew. The elders had hidden the truth, but now the fire no longer cared to conceal. It was no longer fed by the dead. It had begun feeding on the living. Not as punishment, not as cruelty, but as invitation. The old scrolls had spoken of such moments, times when the fire, made sacred by grief, drew forth those ready to surrender, not in pain, but in purpose. The scrolls called them ember souls, those who chose to become part of the flame, to burn not into nothing, but into memory. Nam stood before the fire that night and asked, "What are you becoming?" The flame turned blue, then red, then black, a deep, smokeless hue that swallowed the light around it. In the darkness, a whisper arose from the stone. "You fed me sorrow. You fed me names. Now, feed me self." Nam stepped back, his breath short, his heart heavy. He had known this day would come, that the fire would turn its gaze upon him, but not yet, not so soon. The monks grew wary. Some refused to enter the chamber. Others began to chant again, old chants, meant to bind, to subdue, to contain. But the fire would not be caged. Each chant was swallowed in silence. Each sigil carved into the wall faded overnight. The flame simply chose. One monk, blind since birth, brought a piece of bark with her family's ancestral vow etched into it. The fire accepted it gently. The smoke that rose formed no face, but the woman smiled. "I saw her," she whispered, "my mother. She was waiting in the light." She passed in her sleep that night, smiling. Not all who were chosen burned. Some were touched, marked, changed. One young monk returned from the altar with streaks of ash across his face. He spoke in riddles for a week, and when he sang, flowers bloomed in the cracks of the courtyard stones. Another monk, once cruel and sharp-tongued, knelt for 3 nights without food or water. He returned with no memory of who he was, but spoke the names of strangers in his sleep, names of the forgotten, names no record held. The fire was alive, and like all living things, it had desires. But it did not desire blood, or sacrifice, or obedience. It desired truth. It desired intimacy. It desired surrender. Nam spent many nights staring into it now. He did not kneel. He sat. He listened. The fire whispered not in words, but in feelings. Regret, longing, hope, and more than anything, loneliness, as though it too had been created by fear and wanted to be more. So Nam fed it, not offerings, not names, but stories. He told it of the girl he once knew before the temple, of his mother's quiet hands, of his brother's laughter in the rain. He placed his memories on the altar like candles, and the fire wept. A single drop of golden sap formed at its edge. It cooled into crystal. Nam kept it in his robe. It was warm, always. He was becoming something else, not just a monk, not just a firekeeper, but a bridge between the flame and the flesh, between the remembered and the remembering, between the ones who had passed and the ones who had yet to offer themselves. He knew what was coming. He knew what the fire would one day ask of him. Not today, but soon. And when that day came, he would not fear it. He would walk willingly, because the flame no longer burned for death. It burned for connection. And the most sacred fire is the one we choose to enter. There was one rule spoken in whispers, never written. Do not anoint the living flame. The oil was kept in the lowest chamber beneath the temple, behind a locked grate sealed in wax and prayer. No monk touched it. No ritual called for it. It was mentioned only once in the oldest scrolls, in ink so faint it nearly vanished into the parchment. What was once lit with grief must never be fed with essence. No one explained what essence meant, but the oil glowed even in the dark. Nam found it by accident. Or perhaps the fire led him there. He had been following a thread of warmth, subtle and winding, that pulsed through the stone corridors beneath the reliquary. It moved like breath, tugging him lower, past sealed rooms, past empty urns, past a door that hadn't been opened in decades. The oil chamber was not guarded, only forgotten. Inside, a single jar, tall, sealed, opaque, made of a clay so black it seemed to drink the candlelight. Around its neck, a prayer cord wrapped 5 times, each loop marked with a sigil of severance. On its side, a word written not in ink, but in dried blood. Huen, essence. Hmam did not touch it at first. He simply knelt before it, listening. The jar hummed, not with sound, but with pressure. A pulse, slow, ancient, like the last heartbeat of something once divine. And when he leaned closer, a single word echoed in his mind. Remember. The next night, the fire dimmed. not in peace, but in silence. It refused to respond. No name stirred it, no chants moved it. The monks grew uneasy. They lit candles, offered petals, recited lineage prayers. Still, the flame stayed small, contained, watching, waiting. Hmum knew what it wanted. It had always burned on what was left behind: grief, bones, ash, names. But now it was seeking something deeper. Not the dead, not the forgotten, but the root of memory, the essence of what it meant to be remembered at all. He returned to the oil chamber. The jar was still warm. And when he touched the cord, the prayers broke away like dust. No resistance, no flare of punishment, just quiet release. He lifted the lid. Inside, dark amber liquid, thick as honey, glowing faintly. The scent was unbearable, sweet, ancient, overwhelming, like 1,000 temples all burning at once. It smelled like loss and devotion and home. He dipped 2 fingers in. The oil clung to his skin. It did not drip. It pulsed, alive, waiting. Back at the altar, he stood alone. No monk watched. None dared enter. The chamber had grown heavy these past days, as if time itself had begun to slow. Hmum approached the flame. It was no taller than his hand, still, quiet, expectant. He anointed the stone lip of the pit with the oil, a single line drawn like a wound across the edge. The effect was immediate. The fire froze, stopped moving, then curled inward, then exploded, not in flame, but in light. A column of white fire surged upward, silent and pure. The chamber shook, the stone beneath his feet trembled, the walls moaned with memory. And from within the fire, not faces, not voices, but visions. He saw Mela again, but not as a ghost, as a child, singing beneath a banyan tree, holding a rice doll and laughing. He saw the monk who burned willingly, smiling as he stepped into the fire, not for punishment, but to carry a message. He saw the first lighting of the flame, a desperate act of men kneeling before bones, begging for rain with ash on their tongues. He saw Thien, old, silent, kneeling before the oil jar, holding the same grief Hmum now carried. He saw himself, younger, before vows, before silence, looking into a mirror and asking, "Will I ever be enough to be remembered?" The fire answered. It whispered the truth, not in words, but in knowing. It had never asked to be worshipped, only seen, only witnessed, only fed with sincerity. The oil bled into the altar now. The stone drank it, and the fire grew still again. Not weak, not gone, transformed. It no longer danced. It watched, with purpose, with intent. It had become living. The next day, the monks approached Hmum in reverence. They knelt not to the fire, but to him. He was no longer fire keeper. He was fire walker. The one who had touched the essence, the one who had been seen by the flame and returned unburned. Some monks asked for the oil. Hmum refused. It is not for miracles. It is for endings. One monk ignored him. He broke the seal of the jar, poured a vial, and fed it to a candle lit for his dying brother. The candle flared, The brother awoke, gasping, weeping, alive, and screaming. He would not stop screaming. He clawed at his face. He begged for silence. He died again that night, face frozen in terror. And the candle would not go out. Khnam returned the jar to the chamber. This time he sealed it not with rope, but with silence. A silence so heavy it pressed into the very stone. He whispered no chant, only truth. You are not forbidden. You are final. The fire never asked for the oil again. It had tasted the root of memory. It had touched the depth of sacrifice. It had become something new. Not hungry, not holy, but whole. And from that day forward, no one fed it offerings, only silence, only presence, only names softly remembered by those brave enough to look into the flame and see themselves.
It was still a fire. It burned, it consumed, it pulsed softly in the dark, but it no longer gave light, not warmth, not glow, only shape. A living flame that cast no shadows and lit no faces. It flickered, not in defiance, but in memory. This was no longer fire as men knew it. It had become remembrance incarnate, and that was far more dangerous. The first to notice was a novice monk. He entered the chamber with a candle for his father, recently lost to the coughing sickness. He placed the candle beside the pit, waited for the flame to acknowledge the offering. But it didn't. The flame moved. It danced, but the room remained dark. The walls did not glow. The candle remained unlit. The boy said nothing, but when he returned to the dormitory, his eyes were dull. He claimed he had seen nothing, and then he stopped speaking altogether. Nem tested it himself. He entered at noon when the sun still warmed the outer stones. He carried a mirror. When he placed the mirror before the flame, nothing reflected, not even shadow. It was as though the fire was there and not there, seen but not witnessed, a presence without echo, a light that illuminated only inward. The monks began to fear the chamber. Some refused to enter. Others walked through with closed eyes, hands pressed together, mouths sealed shut. A new word spread among them: the hollow flame, a warning, a reverence, a truth. The fire had turned inward, and the temple followed. Light began to disappear elsewhere. Lanterns burned, but cast no glow. Sunlight seemed paler in the courtyards. The prayer hall shadows grew longer even at dawn. It was as if the fire had swallowed something unseen, a part of reality that could not be returned. In the 6th week of the hollow flame, a monk went missing. Not fled, not dead, just absent. His mat was untouched, his robes folded. His sandals remained at the chamber's entrance, but no one had seen him leave. And when Nem checked the fire that night, the flame rippled, and he heard a voice. He looked too long. The flame had begun to choose again, not by objects, not by names, by gaze. If you looked into it too deeply, too sincerely, it saw you back. And when it saw you,
you changed." One elder monk, silent since the burning of his brother decades ago, approached Nem in secret. He confessed he had seen his brother's face in the flame. "But it wasn't him," he whispered. "It was what he remembered me as." The fire did not show the dead. It showed the memory of the dead as held by the living. And that was far worse, because memories are never kind. One by one, monks began to avoid eye contact with the flame. Some chanted louder, as if sound could shield them. Others kept to the outer halls, praying only from afar. But Nem remained. Not out of bravery, out of obligation, out of love, and out of something deeper. He too wanted to look. So he prepared. He fasted for 7 days. He cleansed the chamber with river water drawn before dawn. He lit no candles. He burned no incense. He removed every object from the room, even the stone altar, until nothing remained but the flame and himself. Then he knelt, and he opened his eyes. At first, there was only blackness, the kind that lives behind closed lids. Then, a shimmer. Not light, not color, but weight. The room pressed inward. The flame flickered once, and then it showed him. Not visions, not ghosts, but versions of himself, standing across from him in the dark. One wore robes soaked in blood. One held the burned scroll of Mela's song. One wept. One smiled. One walked toward the fire and vanished. He saw himself as a boy watching his mother die. He saw himself turning away when the elder monks buried the truth of the flame. He saw every memory he had chosen not to carry, now lit from within by the hollow flame. And in the center of it all, a child, sitting alone, surrounded by ash, mouth open, silent, waiting. It was him, the part he left behind, the part that never grew, the part that never forgave. And the fire was not punishing him. It was offering him back to himself. When Nem opened his eyes, dawn had broken, but the chamber was still dark. The flames still flickered, but nothing in the room was lit. And yet he could see. Not with eyes, with remembrance. He could feel the warmth of 1,000 forgotten voices curled inside that fire, breathing, humming, living. The monks no longer asked questions. They came to Nem not for blessings, but to be seen, to be heard, to place a word, a name, a silence into the hollow flame, and wait. Some left in tears. Others smiled for the first time in years, but all were changed. Because the fire no longer asked for offerings. It asked for truth. In the final days of the hollow flame's silence, a child arrived at the temple gate, alone, barefoot, eyes filled with smoke, but not from fear. She said nothing, only handed Nem a piece of charred wood. It bore no symbol, only a single deep groove, as if scratched by a fingernail. She turned and left, disappeared before any could follow. That night, Nem burned the wood. The fire bowed, and for the first time in weeks, light returned. Not bright, not golden, but gentle, enough to cast a shadow, his shadow. And beside it, Mela's, smiling, not as a ghost, not as memory, but as memory fulfilled. The hollow flame had not taken light, it had taught them to carry it within. And now, as it burned again, it glowed with every soul it had ever held, every silence it had ever soothed, every truth it had ever returned.
The flame was no longer a question. It had become an answer. It no longer needed chance. It no longer demanded names. It no longer reached for the forgotten. It had become still, not silent, but listening, as if waiting for one final word. And Nam knew it was his. He had served the fire longer than any before him. He had fed it memory, bone, and breath. He had given it not just the offerings of the dead, but the truths of the living. Now the temple was at peace. The monks walked softly. The wind returned to the courtyards. Even the birds had begun to sing again. But the fire remained unchanged, still and quiet, a glowing ember that pulsed like a second heart beneath the stone, waiting. Nam could feel it in his bones. He had become part of the altar. His footsteps no longer echoed. His voice carried weight even when he did not speak. When he passed through the halls, the incense shifted. When he prayed, the flame tilted its head. He was no longer a keeper. He was becoming the kept. On the 7th day of the new moon, he received no offerings. No monks came to the altar. No names were left in bowls. No candles were placed on the stone. The fire dimmed, not out of hunger, but grief, because it knew. Nam cleaned the chamber for the last time. He swept the ash. He folded the cloths. He washed the stone with water drawn from the old well, the same one Mela once stood beside in the first vision the fire gave him. Then he removed his robe, not out of shame, out of reverence. Bare-chested, barefoot, he stepped into the center of the room, not toward the fire, but beside it. There was no ritual for this, no scroll to guide him, no chant to follow, only breath, his own and the flames. And then, one more. The monks had gathered outside the chamber. They did not speak. They did not try to stop him. They understood, because something deeper than tradition had passed between them in these final days. He was not dying. He was completing the circle. Nam sat before the fire and whispered, "I have nothing left to give but myself." Not in sacrifice, in remembrance. He reached into the folds of his robe and retrieved the one thing he had never burned, a name, his own, written in ink, folded 3 times, kept all these years within his sleeve. He placed it into the fire. The flame accepted it, not with a hiss, but with a sigh. The room grew cold, not deathly, sacred. And for the first time, Nam felt the fire touch him. Not his skin, his soul. He saw them, all of them, every face, every name, every sorrow that had once been fed to the flame. And beyond them, at the end of the long procession of memory, Mela. She stood in silence, but not alone. The others stood behind her,
shoulder to shoulder, eyes open. The fire did not bind them anymore. They had become its light, and now, so would he. Nam stood, not trembling, not afraid. He stepped into the flame. It did not burn. It embraced. It lifted. It remembered. And when the last part of him dissolved into golden breath, the fire vanished. The altar was cold by morning. The chamber was empty. No ashes remained. Only a faint warmth in the stone where he once sat. And the monks, when they entered, did not weep. They knelt and bowed and sang the melody of Mela one last time. The fire had consumed many things: anger, grief, sorrow, sin. But in the end, it consumed only one thing: the silence left behind when a life is not remembered. And now, that silence was gone, forever. Outside, the bells rang, not the broken ones, not the sealed ones, all of them. A harmony the mountain had never heard, a song not of mourning, but of return. The monks reopened the altar chamber after 7 days. They lit no flame. But as they stepped inside, a flicker of warmth bloomed on the stone. Just for a moment. Not fire, but light. And they knew he had not left. He had become the final offering. The one that needed no burning, because remembrance was enough.
The altar is cold now, where fire once burned for centuries, consuming grief, whispering names, breathing memory. There is only silence. But the silence is no longer hollow. It is full, soft, complete. The monks no longer enter the chamber to feed the flame. They come to listen. They kneel, not in duty, but in stillness. They bow, not in fear, but in gratitude. Because though the fire is gone, something remains. At first, they believed it was memory, residual warmth in the stone, a lingering scent of ash and old prayers. But then, the dreams returned. Monks woke with tears drying on their cheeks, not from sorrow, but from presence. Children born beneath the temple now speak of the man of light who walks the garden paths barefoot, silent, smiling. And when the wind moves through the trees, it hums. Always the same tune, Mila's melody, but slower now, finished. No one has seen Nam, not truly, but his presence is everywhere. When novices forget the last word of a chant, it returns to their lips like a breath from behind their shoulder. When offerings are left in the old way, bowls of rice, folded names, petals of mourning, they vanish before morning. Not taken, accepted. The fire no longer flickers at the heart of Sangvihara, but a glow remains, a soft luminescence that only reveals itself in darkness, not to illuminate the room, but to remind those who enter that they are seen, that they are not alone, that remembrance burns longer than flame. The stone beneath the altar remains untouched, but on certain nights, when the moon is lowest and the mists coil tightly around the mountain, pilgrims speak of a figure kneeling there, a man of ash and gold, head bowed, palms open, listening. They say if you whisper a name in that chamber, and that name has no grave,
No shrine, no prayer left in the world. He will carry it to wherever souls go when they are no longer mourned. They call it the watching flame now, not fire, but witness, not altar, but bridge. Some say it is the soul of the temple itself. Others say it is Nam, or Mila, or all those who entered the fire willingly, not to be erased, but to become something eternal. The great bell rings once a year now, only once, on the longest night, a single resonant toll that echoes through the valleys and across the forest. No one strikes it, it simply rings, and when it does, all light within the temple fades, and then returns, brighter, wider, more whole. Children born under that sound grow with strange gifts. They remember things they've never been told. They see figures in firelight that others miss. And when they kneel before the empty altar, they smile, as if someone has just said their name, softly, lovingly, as if they were being welcomed home. In time, the stories became legend. The fire that once fed on sorrow, the monk who listened, the girl who sang until her name became a hymn. They are no longer tales of horror, but of return, of what it means to be held even after death, of what happens when memory is no longer a weight, but a light. And deep beneath the stone, in the oldest part of the temple, where no feet walk and no torch reaches, the ember still lives, small, quiet, but alive. It does not hunger. It does not reach. It only waits and watches, because one day someone will come with a name no one else remembers, with a grief no one else can hold, and the ember will light itself again, not to burn, not to consume, but to carry. Because what the monk gave was not just an offering, it was a vow that no soul, no matter how forgotten, would ever again be lost to the dark. As long as there is breath and ash and silence, the flame will watch. And when the last name is whispered, not in pain, but in peace, the flame will flicker one final time and go still. Not extinguished, fulfilled.